Hey there, welcome to the first installment of Paper 2 Resources. This is going to probably remind you a lot of what we were doing with Paper 1 when I would break down Frederick Douglass and kind of connect it to some of the things that we've been discussing in class, be they readings or lectures, and you get the idea. So, what I'm going to be doing here today is basically introducing you to this Sam Patch guy. I mean, I want you to think about something for just a second. He's this working class American. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I mean, there's a book that's been written about him, and the stuff that he was doing, the things that he was engaged in, were happening well over 200 years ago, and somebody somewhere thought strongly enough about this to record this sort of activity and make it into at least one full-length book. In any case, we'll get to the who, what, when, where, and how of Sam Patch here in just a second. But for the time being, there's sort of like an organizational question that I always like to ask when I'm in class. And it's going to be a little bit different for us, but I think that you're going to get the idea here in a second. And if you think about it, I also think it's going to help you really move in the direction of really engaging that central question. So, you ready? I want you to ask yourself who or what a celebrity is, okay? Now, I know you can't answer back, but think about it and put me on pause. If you want to put me on pause, maybe jot down a couple notes. Because if you think about who or what a celebrity is, that's actually going to go a long way when it comes to engaging this central question. It's actually a very important part of this central question. Now, yeah, I don't know, maybe you put me on pause, maybe not, but if you're back, ask yourself another question. Are celebrities dangerous? That's another question that I like to ask in class a lot. And, we always have a pretty robust, energetic, passionate conversation. And there are people that firmly believe that absolutely celebrities can be dangerous. They command a huge audience and, they set a lot of trends. And if they're moving in a direction that's not so healthy, however you want to define unhealthy, that can be problematic on a societal level. In any case, let's get back into Sam Patch because we are going to figure out, the connection between, celebrity and what's going on here in the early years of the 19th century. So get your book out if you brought it with you, and if not, if you're following along with us, I want you to open up to the very first page of the book. It's so early that it literally doesn't have a page. It just says preface. Okay. If you're following along with me, I'm going to read that first paragraph. This is the story of Sam Patch, a factory hand who, in the 1820s, became America's first professional daredevil. Patch jumped from high places beside waterfalls. Journalists wrote about him, crowds came to see him, boys imagined being him, and he became a famous man. If you go to the second paragraph here, this is really going to drive at the point that I was trying to make a second ago. Sam Patch was a mill boy. That's where I am. The second paragraph there in that first page. Sam Patch was a mill boy who became a celebrity, and that is the storyline of this book. So, who is Sam Patch? Well, we know a few things about him. We know that he is a working class American in the Northeast, and we also know that he's going to become a famous celebrity, which is the whole reason that I asked you those questions a few minutes ago. For right now, I want to connect a few more dots. And to do that, we need to turn to page 4. Scroll down to page 4, whatever it is that you're using to follow along with us. I am 4 lines down from the top with a sentence that starts out, "Thus Americans said the promoters." You see what I'm talking about? Thus, Americans, said the promoters, could enjoy domestic manufactured goods without threats to agriculture and without the European messiness of industrial cities or the industrial working class. There would, they promised, be no Manchesters in America. In other words, we're Americans, we're special, we're unique, and we don't have to worry about the stuff that came along industrialization over there in Europe. Things are going to be very, very different for the Americans. That's what we're being told, okay? Hold that thought. I want to go down to the next full paragraph there on page 4, still on the same page. It starts out at first Samuel Slater. You see what I'm talking about? At first, Samuel Slater's Pawtucket kept that promise. His earliest mill workers were children of his partners and associates, then the children of Pawtucket artisans and farmers. Within a few years, however, he was searching beyond the neighborhood for mill hands and outworkers. Slater needed women and children, and he advertised for widows with large families. What he found was whole families headed by propertyless, destitute men. The Patches were one of these. Doesn't exactly sound like it's all that inviting or a happy scenario, and that's because it's not. The next paragraph down is really, really important, and it's going to drive at the centrality of this question. As the new family struggled into Pawtucket, you see what I'm talking about? As the new family struggled into Pawtucket, Slater and the other mill owners began referring to the workers as poor children. That description of people, pay attention to this part, those who are dependent on their labor for daily support. If that sounds familiar, it's probably not a coincidence. If you think back to the argument that Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were having when George Washington is trying to get this country up and off the ground, one of the biggest arguments was whether or not we should go down the road of industrialization. Alexander Hamilton very much favored an industrial based economy, and Thomas Jefferson was deeply, deeply suspicious of that. And if you think back to that time in our class, Jefferson makes it really, really clear. Whenever you go down the road of industrialization, what you're ultimately going to get is dependency. And I told you, as a matter of fact, that was an exam question, right? What was Thomas Jefferson trying to prevent? He was trying to prevent industrial dependency. This isn't some crazy, maniacal, philosopher that's just totally out of touch with, the economy. This is Samuel Slater. Samuel Slater is the guy that owns the factory. He doesn't have any reason to say that, and he says it point blank. These people are becoming dependent. And so, it turns out Americans aren't that special. And as we went down the road of industrialization, of course, what came along with it was dependency, much like Thomas Jefferson predicted that it would. Now, what I'd like to do, I'm going to leave a lot of this reading up to you, but I would like you to kind of turn to page 18. I'm on page 18, toward the bottom of page 18. I want to talk to you a little bit about how the Patches, as in his family, kind of came to Pawtucket in the first place. There's a paragraph that starts out toward the bottom. With that, the Patches exhausted. You see where I am? With that, the Patches exhausted the family connections on which they had subsisted since their marriage. The long stay in North Reading and the moves to Danvers and Marblehead had been determined by the availability of relatives and their resources. In 1807, the Patches moved to the mill village of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, nearly 100 miles south of the neighborhoods in which the Patches and McIntyres had always lived. The move was a climactic moment in their history. It marked their passage out of the family economy and into the labor market. In other words, once upon a time, they were landowners and they were the masters of their destiny, and now they're workers and are dependent. Very last line on page 18. New England families? New England families did not move into Pawtucket's mills unless something bad had happened, usually to the man of the house. In other words, if this is going to go forward, if you're strolling in, used to be a farmer, and you come into Pawtucket, Rhode Island, it's usually not all that happy of a situation. Okay. Now, there's another way of looking at what's going on here. Industrialization is what I'm talking about. And this other way of looking at things does sort of lend itself to the concept of opportunities, new opportunities that are sort of being hatched as a result of the process of industrialization. Before I really, delve into this, I want to I want to ask you if maybe you have had the experience of jumping off of a high point and into a body of water, whether that's a diving board, maybe it's a cliff, or I'm not talking about like a cliff diver or something like that. I'm talking about 20, 30 feet tops. I don't know about you, but I've had that experience. You'd never know it by looking at me today, but I tried it once upon a time, and it didn't exactly go very well. It was actually a very terrifying experience. And I guess my point in telling you any of this is you better know what you're doing if you're going to do something like that. It's not something that you just want to, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong. So, the title of this book is Sam Patch, the Famous Jumper. And as we began this conversation discussing, he becomes famous by jumping off of waterfalls. Okay, hold that thought because for right now, I want to introduce you to a guy by the name of Timothy B. Crane. Flip. This is in the next chapter. I want you to flip over to page 43. Scroll down to page 43. Toward the top of page 43, it's a paragraph that starts out, a builder and sawmill owner. You see where I am? A builder and sawmill owner named Timothy B. Crane had bought the forested north bank of Passaic Falls in August 1827. In September, he turned it into a commercial pleasure garden, announcing that he would reshape the forest in the name of material and moral progress. Although nature has done more for this spot of earth than perhaps any of its size to render it beautiful and interesting to the visitor, it is nevertheless susceptible of very great embellishments from the hand of art. And with that, he improved the grounds with gravel walkways, imported bushes and trees, and a combined ice cream parlor and saloon. Crane called his establishment the Forest Garden. During the next few summers, crowds went there for ice cream and conversation, and there were periodic circuses, Indian war dances, and displays of fireworks as well. What just happened? Well, he created himself an amusement park. It always reminds me of the Arboretum. And if you know anything about an amusement park or a garden like the Arboretum, you can tell me that they're going to charge you admission to come in. They're not just going to welcome you in out of the kindness of their hearts. Crane's a businessman, and he purchased the Passaic Falls. You got to ask yourself, what was Passaic Falls before it was the Forest Garden? And of course, what it was the place where Sam Patch and other Milltown boys like him learned how to jump off of waterfalls. It was public territory, it was open domain, and people used it not only for recreation, but I think if you were to ask someone like Patch, it kind of held a really important, warm place in their hearts. So, what's going to be the reaction? It's not going to be a really happy reaction, but I want to show you. Go to page 46. Go to page 46. Right there in the middle of page 46, Sam Patch, in short, right in the middle. Sam Patch, in short, was an angry and not particularly admirable victim of the huge social process that was creating places like Pawtucket and Patterson and granting money and respect to people like Timothy Crane. As he watched Crane boss his gardeners and bridge builders, an unhappy constellation of class anger and rum-soaked resentment took shape in the minds of Sam Patch. Sam let it be known that he would spoil Crane's day. In other words, Crane had all of these festivities planned for his opening ceremonies, and Sam just became determined to ruin all of that. I'm still on 46, paragraph that starts out, that Saturday, all of Patterson. That Saturday, all of Patterson turned out to watch Timothy Crane pull his bridge over the chasm. Constables patrolled the crowd looking for Sam Patch. They'd locked him in a basement for safekeeping, but somebody let him out. Next paragraph down. Tim Crane swaggered through the afternoon, tugging at his whiskers and shouting instructions to his men, always with an eye on the crowd. The bridge rested on log rollers on the northern bank. Cables stretched across the chasm, and ropes and tackles waited to edge the bridge over the precipice and along the cables and to set it into place on the substructure. At last, the workmen took their stations and pulled at the ropes, and Clinton Bridge edged slowly across Crane's fairy tale landscape, moved by sweating men and by what the Patterson intelligencer called the exercise of a good deal of ingenuity and mechanical skill on the part of Timothy Crane. As the bridge reached the cliff and began riding over the cables, things went wrong. One of the log rollers slipped and dropped end over end into the pool below the falls, and the bridge lurched dangerously. Crane's men regained control and set it safely into place. Tim Crane looked up for applause, but the cheering was broken by shouts from the south bank, for there was Sam Patch standing erect on a rock at the edge of a cliff. Sam spoke to the people near him, then he stepped off. Next paragraph. It was a straight 70-foot drop to the water below, and Sam took it in fine Pawtucket style. At the end, he brought up his knees, then snapped them straight, drew his arms to his sides, and went into the water like an arrow. Tim Crane and his kidnapped audience stared into the chasm, certain Sam was dead, but a few seconds Sam shot to the surface. The crowd cheered wildly as Sam sported in the water, paddled over to Crane's log roller, took the trail rope between his teeth, and towed it slowly and triumphantly to shore. Before he jumped, Sam Patch told the people on his side of the chasm that Crane had done a great thing and he meant to do another. I want you to think about something, and the something is really, really critical to paper two. This is a jump that probably seems a little bit forgettable. I mean, I couldn't tell you who Timothy Crane was, let alone Sam Patch, before I read this book, but this has survived for close to 200 years now, and you got to ask yourself why. I have a theory. My theory is that everybody in the crowd was thinking the same thing that day. Everybody was angry, just like Sam was angry, but Sam had the audacity to do something about it. Right? One final paragraph there on 47 toward the bottom of page 47. At its simplest, you see where I am? At its simplest, Sam's leap at the Clinton Bridge was an act of vandalism. Timothy Crane was an enterprising, successful man, and Sam Patch was a sullen failure who risked his life to ruin Crane's celebration. We might label the jump an act of drunken resentment and leave it at that, and so it may have been. But the crowd applauded Sam Patch's leap, and the leap survived in the folklore of Patterson as an admirable performance. Something, it seems, had prepared the people of Patterson to enjoy Sam's assault on the festivities of Tim Crane. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been to like a movie or a ballpark, a baseball game's even better example, and there's someone, usually is a guy, that has had a little bit too much to drink, and he's being obnoxious, and he's standing up, and he's causing a scene, and he's generally a distraction, and everybody in your part of the park is thinking the exact same thing. I just wish this guy would go away. And finally, somebody works up the nerve to go tell on him, and security comes and they escort him out. What happens next? Exactly. Everybody in that area starts applauding because he got exactly what he deserved, right? Everyone was thinking the same thing. Nobody had the nerve, the backbone to do anything about it. But when it finally happened, everyone is simultaneously happy. And I think that's what's happening there. And I also think what's happening in Sam Patch is why it survived for so long. What Sam did was what everybody else wanted to do. They just didn't have the nerve to do it. Now, you're seeing other people that we've talked about in this class react in similar ways. I want to kind of revisit another Rhode Islander, a guy by the name of Seth Luther. And Seth Luther warned about this aristocracy of capital. Remember talking about that? He worried that handing factories and machines and all the means of production from one generation to the next generation to the next generation was going to lead us down the very similar road that Europe had gone down, and it wouldn't be an aristocracy of landowners, it would be an aristocracy of factory owners, but it would basically be the same thing. You would have a very small handful of haves and a massive army of have-nots. Now, whereas Sam jumped drunkenly off of a waterfall and drew all kinds of attention to the fact that what he thought Tim Crane was doing was not okay, Seth Luther went down a very different road. For Seth Luther, this is about giving everybody the right to vote. If all men, including working class men, whether they had, two nickels to their name or they were the richest man in all of Slatersville, um, regardless, they all would have one vote, and that vote would not count any more, any less than anybody else's vote. And so this is not just happening with Sam Patch. You're seeing this happen in various forms and fashions in our class as well. In our next installment, we'll see Sam push this envelope even further. But as it turns out, somebody or a collection of somebody's thought that maybe Sam could offer an even bigger advantage to the workers. You'll see what I mean if you join me for the next installment.